All right, let's talk trinkets for season 1 of Midnight. Before we kind of get started, just remember that this is still beta, so anything can change at any given time. We're going to get a build next week that could literally flip all of these trinkets on their heads, especially with kind of having data from rating and Mythic Plus testing. But I'm probably going to skip over most of these Delve trinkets. There's not really much highlights here, like this trinket. It's a 2-minute CD for only 10 seconds of accruing haste. Pretty bad. Stunning yourself for 5 seconds. Split damage procs that usually isn't very good. Isn't very good. Damage proc. Stat proc. Damage proc. Pretty basic stuff. The only one I'm really thinking about, like, saying, ooh, this could be good, if it's tuned well enough, is Glorious Crusader's Keepsake, which is just procking, your highest secondary stat, which for us is haste. And since haste is really the main stat that we care about, buffing our highest secondary stat is really valuable. And then you have the little party member effect on it if other people are wearing it as well. The main stat PvP trinket and the proc to, I mean, these are usually like not great. It really depends on your spec, but I don't think these are going to be very good for Devourer. And then we kind of get into the sort of the main chunk, your raid and your Mythic Plus trinkets, which are most of the time what we're going to be looking at, to be using in a regular season. Eye of the Drowning Void. Your damaging spells and abilities have a chance to tear open a rift of the void within your target, erupting for 5,606 shadow damage split among nearby enemies. I kind of talked about this already a little bit, but trinkets that deal split damage, unless they just do a lot of damage baseline, just usually aren't very good. And with how Devour interacts with stats like haste, stat buffs are just generally speaking going to be really good, unless trinkets like these just do an amount of damage that's kind of hard to ignore. I don't see that happening in this case with Eye of the Drowning Void, and there's a couple other trinkets that I think are kind of in the same boat. Emberwing Feather. Unleash an Emberwing Heat Wave, increasing your haste by 578 for 15 seconds. You have a low chance to suffer an Emberwing Burn, reducing one of your other secondary stats by 179 for 10 seconds. Now, I'm unsure if this is like if the low chance is like a proc or if it's like on use. I have a chance to, instead of getting the heat wave, I get the burn. And just having a chance to just not get stats is bad. So I mean, I don't think really most people have been using this one. I haven't been using it. It just kind of seems like a trap for, especially a 2-minute on use, which in my opinion doesn't line up super well. Heart of Wind, the Great Heart of Wind. Your spells and abilities have a chance to awaken the Heart of Wind, surrounding you with strong gales that increase your haste by 242 for 10 seconds. Like, unless this trinket is tuned into the Abyss, this is great. I mean, haste proc is just what we want all the time. Heart of Wind, really good. I have really no... I have no qualms with this trinket. I mean, it's pretty basic as far as trinkets concerned. It looks like anyone can get it because it's in agi and strength, but this is definitely a trinket to look out for when the season drops, unless it gets nerfed into the ground, which is totally possible. Soulcatcher's Charm. Your damaging spells have a chance to haunt the target, dealing about 100k shadow damage over 12 seconds. If the target dies while haunted, the effect transfers to a nearby enemy, inflicting 150% of the shadow damage over the remaining duration. This trinket currently is absolutely busted. It is doing an insane amount of single target damage. Even in a... Because keep in mind, intellect-based trinkets, like anything base with main stat on it, generally its damage effect isn't going to do a whole lot of damage. A really good example is like Sigil of the Cosmic Hunt for Havoc Demon Hunter. Like that trinket, it's not going to do a ton of damage, like on its effect. It has a good effect, like it has the execute damage effect, but at the same time, it's not dealing 10% or 12% of your damage in single target like this trinket is doing currently. And even in keys where, AoE is king a lot of the time, this trinket's still like almost 5% of your damage in a key, which is just insane. There's not a chance in the world that this trinket doesn't get nerfed before launch. So we'll kind of have to see. But I mean, if you're beta testing and you say I want to do the most damage as physically possible, you're gonna run a Soul Catcher's Charm. Vessel of Souls. This is a mastery base trinket, so not a bad stat for us. Your spells and abilities have a chance to awaken a soul within the vessel. Each soul you collect increases your intellect by 37 for 1 minute. This trinket, I think, is really interesting because it's kind of that thing with the Astral Antenna currently in Manaforge Omega where, you're spawning um, these things that you're collecting, and but with the soul vessel of souls, you're not getting a ton of stat from what you're collecting, but it lasts for a really long time. So I'm really interested to see, once we have sims and things like that, kind of how this trinket works out, because I actually really like the idea of this trinket and just having this, ramp, almost like a ramping trinket that doesn't punish you for getting out of combat, because ramping trinkets can tend to do that as well. But I could see this being good in most types of content, assuming it's, tuned well. Never Melting Ice Crystal increases your critical strike by 930 for 20 seconds. Every time one of your non-periodic spells deals a critical strike, the bonus is reduced by 186. 3-minute cooldown. Yeah, this is not a good trinket in my eyes, personally. Partially because the big thing is when non-periodic spells deals a critical strike. So we don't have a dot. So the main classes that are going to benefit from this at all are going to be your Aflox, your Shadow Priests, specs like that they could theoretically, get a lot more value out of this trinket than something like us, because let's say I get, my next 5 casts of Consume are all crits. Let's say I get lucky. Well, that's cool and all, but now my bonus is gone on my 3-minute cooldown CD. This, in its current state, this trinket is basically dead in the water as I see it for us. Reality Breacher. Your damaging spells have a chance to summon a Void Tendril near your target's location, dealing 3,214 shadow damage to all enemies within 4 yards after a brief delay. Now, the difference between something like this and Eye of the Drowning Void is this is not split damage. It's lower. It's a lower amount of damage, but it's not split. So this is going to be a trinket that it would be purely for AoE. You're not going to run this in single target over Eye of the Drowning Void. You probably don't run either. But assuming this, is pretty good, this could be a decent AoE trinket, but we're not really lacking the AoE to permit either. I'd say with our current tuning as of, November 25th, 26th, we're much more leaning towards stat trinkets, and even if you're going to take a damage trinket, you would take a single target damage trinket, something like a Soul Catcher's Charm. Light Spire Core. You're embraced by the light, increasing mastery by 86. Your damaging spells and abilities can call a beam of radiant light nearby. Standing in the light blesses you with 150 mastery while you stand in it. Now, they've done these trinkets before. They've been doing them for years. Trinkets that I have to stand in, especially when I'm playing a Devourer, are just absolutely mind-numbingly annoying to use. Especially if you're playing Void Scarred, you're gonna have to step out of your Lightspire core a lot of the time if you're, having to dash in with Voidblade or the Hunt. So this is one I would really hope we don't end up having to use, because the whole standing in a beam thing, especially as a mid-range class and not a full 40 yard range class, this could get really frustrating. Sapling of the Dawn Root. Your spells and abilities have a chance to uproot a Light Spawn Lasher to aid you in combat for 15 seconds, dealing up to 14,571 physical damage. The Light Spawn Lasher then withers, bursting into light-infused sap and inflicting holy damage split among nearby enemies. Pretty basic proc. We'd have to just see how the damage is, because it looks like they're capped at that 14,000 and then it dies. So it would just come down to proc rate. Freight Runner's Flask. Take a sip of the drink you swiped from the freight, increasing your crit strike by 407 for 15 seconds, 1 minute, 30-second cooldown. Pretty basic amount of crit. Probably not going to be used because on-use crit probably isn't that great for us anyway. But pretty standard trinket as far as, on-use stat buff goes. Mind Piercer's Sigil. Your damaging spells have a chance to stir the void near your target, interrupting for shadow damage split among nearby enemies. You siphon energy from the void, gaining intellect for 10 seconds. I think the problem is we had what's it? The Fractalist Trinket, the Nether Prism. We had the Nether Prism in Season 3, and now we're like, oh, let's keep making trinkets that don't have baseline stats on them, and now give them to casters who don't like that. This trinket's really bad. I've tested this in a couple keys. The damage is really bad. It's split damage. It's a high amount of damage, but it's split on a trinket that does not give you stats baseline, and it gives you. And I mean, from what I could tell, the uptime on that intellect proc is not that great. But this is just absolutely terrible. I really dislike this trinket. I really dislike trinkets that they're asking you to sacrifice, a baseline stat line, like even like something like this sapling that could be totally terrible. It still has intellect on it. So they're asking you to consider a lot when running stuff like this, and I just don't think this is worth it with current tuning. That's a cantrip ring, so we're gonna skip over that, but this is pretty cool. Just has a lot of haste, so this is probably your best ring, and then you can, absorb some damage. Shadow of the Imperium Requiem. Your harmful spells have a high chance to call cosmic shards from the heavens to slice your target and one nearby enemy for cosmic damage. If either enemy is below 35% health, gain haste for 12 seconds as you speed them to their fate. Now you might say, Ninturn, 11,730 haste after the scat squish is an obscene amount, and you'd be right. This trinket is most definitely bugged, because it's showing the exact same number for both. Even if it's an execute trinket, it's probably going to give a high amount of haste, but it's not going to give that much. The only fight, because I don't think it's ever worth a Mythic Plus, just with how packs kind of work at Mythic Plus. But even in Raid, I think the only fight from the fights we tested that I think this would be worth on would be below Ren, because you're constantly refreshing the eggs over and over. So there's a chance to get like that really high haste proc, assuming that it stays a high haste proc. Another cantrip item, just the Warglaive. It's not good. It has only crit on it, which isn't great for us. And then the damage proc is not good. But cool mog. I mean, I'm wearing it right now. Cool mog. Gaze of the Alnseer. Your damage and healing has a chance to grant you Aln Sight for 12 seconds, while active, casting spells and abilities manifests unstable Aln Scorned and consumes their essence to grant you intellect for 12 seconds. Multiple applications may overlap. I have been using this trinket a lot, actually. Undetermined, how much better it is than anything else, but with how much haste we're running and wanting to run at the same time of like, having Devourer be so many of our casts, and we're just we have a lot of casts, I guess. So I think this trinket could be pretty good, but I mean, it's just, stats based on how much you're able to cast. So it definitely leans more into specs that want a lot of haste. This trinket also is able to be used by any spec. I think it drops for literally everybody. So just keep that in mind when you're begging your loot council to give this to you. Wraps of Cosmic Madness. Desperately unravel yourself over 2 seconds to unleash a barrage of 13 cosmic missiles at your target, increased by your haste. Important. Each deals cosmic damage split between nearby enemies. Damage increased by 30% per additional enemy, up to 150%. Allied deaths induce further madness, reducing the cooldown by 60 seconds. This is the same, and I apologize. I'm gonna look it up in the Dungeon Journal because I cannot remember the name of this thing for the life of me, and I always try to. Manic Grave Torch. This is Manic Grave Torch, but for intellect specs. It is literally the same exact thing. This trinket was good. The original trinket was good in its time because it just did a lot of damage. But part of the why this thing is good is if you're pugging, whether it's in a key either, like it could be a key, it could be a raid, but especially if you're pugging a raid, this trinket's just going to gain a lot of value because, I mean, most of the time when you're pugging, you're going to have people that die, especially early on in the season, too. So this is a trinket to definitely keep your eye on, at least. It's cool. I mean, I like things like this. I mean, you don't want your allies to die, but, you know, it could be interesting to see how this ends up in terms of damage and, like, how ally deaths kind of play into that. Veilgore's Final Stare. Seize the eye's draconic power, granting you mastery, diminishing over 15 seconds and allowing you to see hidden enemies. Now, a lot of people weren't too big on this trinket at first, but I tested this a lot when using Void Scarred in the Raid and in Mythic Plus testing, and I think this trinket's very strong. The only issue I think could happen is, you know, it doesn't line up, and you're only going to use this thing in meta, so, I mean, sitting on it cannot feel great, but in the end, it can kind of be worth it. But this isn't a trinket you just press, and then you just press. You're not pressing this on cooldown, because if you're using it outside of meta, it's just not going to do that much for you. But overall, I think it's a really good trinket. I think it's a little over budgeted in terms of stats, and that's part of why it's good. So we'll kind of have to see. I think in general, kind of what we've been recommending among me and some of the other Demon Hunter Theory crafters is double passive trinkets are generally preferred for Devourer, just with how, you know, the average time you're getting into Void meta can change pretty rapidly. But I'd say for now, this is a good trinket to try out. And then last trinket, Locust Walker's Ribbon. Casting spells is a high chance to tempt you with the power of the Void, increasing your intellect by 268 for 10 seconds. Each temptation permanently increases this effect by 5%, up to 10 times, diminishing quickly upon leaving combat. This is a raid trinket. The only time this trinket is going to be used in Mythic Plus is what happened with Eye of Kazan in Season 2 of War Within, where it ended up being used in Mythic Plus, and I mean, I used it in Mythic Plus as Havoc, and as Holy Priest I played at the time too, that it ended up being that if your tank could just keep you in combat forever, you know, you kept the stats forever, and you just got to, you know, you kept that ramped effect for the whole time, and it just ended up being really strong. This is kind of the same thing. It's a higher amount of intellect, especially if you're, you know, able to increase it up to 50% over the course of a fight. And I mean, every time it procs, it's getting increased by that 5%, so I could see this being pretty good in Raid. But those are all of our trinkets for Season 1. Just to kind of go over the highlights really quick, Glorious Crusader's Keepsake might be good from Delves. Soul Catcher's Charm is OP. Heart of Wind seems really strong. Mind Piercer's Sigil is probably the worst trinket of the game, potentially. Veilgore's Final Stare is pretty good. Gaze of the Allseer seems pretty good. This cantrip item's good. This cantrip item's not. This could be interesting to use, and this is probably pretty good in Raid. But overall, I think that's kind of covering what we wanted to cover. So I will see you guys later in the week in the next video. See ya.